We will now begin our second panel discussion of the day, entitled The Path to Quantum Supremacy, moderated by Jackie Tame, operating partner at Playground Global. Joining us are Dr. Bharath Kannan, co-founder and CEO of Atlantic Quantum, Corban Tilleman-Dick, co-founder and CEO of Maybell Quantum, and Zach Yerushalmi, co-founder and CEO of Elevate Quantum.
Yeah. The comfy chairs.
Okay. Good morning. Thrilled to be here. I am Jackie Tame, and you guys just did my work for me, so I don't need to introduce my esteemed panelists. They will actually introduce themselves in just a moment. Thank you so much to SCSP for hosting us. This is a topic that is near and dear to certainly all four of our hearts, and hopefully to many of yours. It sounds like Dr. Mason made some great sort of inroads into our discussion. I do want to announce that we were having a very spirited debate right before this panel, and we decided that we were sort of like going back and forth whether or not we change the focus of this panel to the best Indian food in the world or stick with quantum. For your sake, we're going to stick with quantum today, but we do have a lot of thoughts on this for afterwards if you want to come see us. So again, Jackie Tame, operating partner at Playground Global. We make early stage investments in deep technologies to include two quantum companies, notably PsiQuantum in the hardware space and Phasecraft in the algorithm space. What we want you to take away today, and I'm really thrilled because these three actually know each other quite well, so it should be a really spicy and spirited conversation for everyone, is that useful quantum computing is inevitable and increasingly imminent. AI, which you hear about a ton, can discover new materials, but we'll need quantum computing, in my personal opinion, to really move the needle in terms of fundamentally changing the world. Quantum is as important to humanity in the next 50 years as semiconductor technology was to the last half century. Period. And the US is in the lead right now, but the gap is closing quickly. And so we really need this conversation and others like it to catalyze policymaker involvement even more than it has been. We're really grateful for what it has been in the last few years, but there's much, much more to do to include government, industry, private capital partnerships, and continued government spending in this area. We are not done in terms of getting to where we need to be. So I'd ask each of my esteemed panelists to just briefly introduce themselves and their companies, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Terrific. So Corban Tilleman-Dick, founder and CEO of Maybell Quantum, and we focus on the quantum infrastructure layer, so the foundational elements, cryogenics, wiring, things like that, that other companies need in order to build their quantum computers.
Zach Yerushalmi. First, I want to give a shout out to SCSP, PJ, and Olivia in particular. They are as kind as they are capable. That goes in all dimensions. They wired me seemingly for like an undercover mission. It was fine. So I'm Zach Yerushalmi. I'm the chief exec of Elevate Quantum, and we are the US Quantum Tech Hub. Industry-led, public-private partnership with the goal of dramatically accelerating the pace of commercialization of this technology that hopefully all of us think is pretty important.
Yeah, I'm Bharath Kannan. I'm CEO at Atlantic Quantum. We're a quantum hardware company building the actual QPUs themselves, spin out from MIT. We're working on superconducting qubits, so we actually use some of the infrastructure types of infrastructure that Corban's company builds, and very similar to perhaps some of the things you've seen from Google and Amazon recently, a similar architecture there.
Also, Bharat's hill to die on is that Central New Jersey has the best Indian food in the world, which I lived in Chennai for a couple of years. It was fighting words.
You gave it away. You gave it away.
Yeah.
Okay, really quickly, just to get a sort of lay of the room, as it were. Quickly for the audience, please raise your hand if you work in the government. Okay. I think you're supposed to return to office. I'm just, sorry, too soon. Okay. Please raise your hand if you are from industry. Great. And please raise your hand if you're in the private capital community. Excellent, my people. And if you've seen work on a Majorana particle recently, please raise your hand. All right, at least two.
So
amazing.
Someone from Microsoft is here.
Okay, Corban, given that, let's begin with the basics. What is quantum? How can we develop an intuitive sense of what this means and how we use it?
So the hard thing about quantum is getting an intuitive sense is always going to be difficult. I'm guessing that more folks in this room studied economics than physics. And so I'll start with an analogy there, which is, the laws of microeconomics are very different than the laws of macroeconomics. And the way you understand those two systems, those two levels, are fundamentally different. The universe is similar in that the laws of classical mechanics, those are what we interact with every day. You throw a ball up, the ball comes back down, you light a rocket on fire, it goes boom. Anything from a baseball to special relativity, that's all covered by classical mechanics. Quantum mechanics governs systems that are extraordinarily small and extraordinarily cold. And it is an entirely separate set of laws that has equally strong predictive values. Now, a whole bunch of things we use already are quantum. Transistors, the band gap phenomenon that makes them possible, it's a quantum phenomenon. The atomic clocks that allow us to have GPS, that is quantum. MRIs, that's quantum. However, when folks are talking about quantum today, they're usually talking about leveraging two principles of quantum mechanics, entanglement and superposition, that allow us to do entirely new things. So where most of the time, when we're talking about new things in technology, be it AI or the metaverse or any of the exciting stuff that all of us care about, we're talking about a different way to use a computer. With quantum, we're talking about reinventing what a computer is. And the implications of that are incredibly profound. Right now, the best number out there is that this is going to drive $3.5 trillion of new value. That's a huge number. But it's also probably a wild understatement, because it's like somebody in the 1950s saying, this is what computers are good for, right? And the things that we know quantum will unlock. Dr. Mason mentioned a couple, but around material science, around medicine, around optimization, these are things that will fundamentally transform what it means to be a human and what we can do as a species.
Yeah, I mean, given all of that, one can only surmise, and this is my background, 17 years in the national security space, that the implications are hugely positive for industry and lots of unlocking, and can be really potentially catastrophic as well from a security perspective, right? Zach, can you help us bottom line the implications of quantum for national and economic security, and in your view, kind of where are we vis-a-vis the China race here?
Happy to give my perspective. Also welcome your point of view on this. Truly, Jacqueline has set the industry standard for how to engage the public sector on this. So the framework I use is opportunity and threat. On the opportunity side of it, let's kind of pause quantum computing for a second, which is transformative and important. Let's just talk about quantum sensing. We hear a lot about the fragility of GPS, and so you need to build resiliency a lot around those sensors. Really, all paths towards building that resiliency is through quantum sensors that are used effectively for next generation navigation. The next generation navigation solutions, that's the timeline for quantum compute is a little bit away. The quantum sensing stuff is here today. It's what powers the internet with atomic clocks. It's what powers a lot of networking. The next evolution of that will enable folks to have that resiliency on the go. It's a $10 to $20 billion opportunity now. When we think about the computing side of it, Corban alluded to this $3.5 trillion. That's it's larger than the financial services sector. Sorry, larger than healthcare, slightly smaller than the financial services sector. Big, right? And when I think about the opportunity set, when the transistor was initially invented in Murray Hill, New Jersey. Central New Jersey, kind of.
Great Indian food.
Great Indian food. Correlation, causation. So when that was invented, the killer app was the hearing aid, right? So if it's like us sitting there projecting the market cap of all transistor value based off of one killer app that we know about, which is typically molecular modeling. So it's unimaginably large. And if we think about, again, that analogy, transistor invented in Murray Hill, New Jersey, but commercialized elsewhere, it's also the threat side of it, right? Just because you invent the future doesn't mean you get to keep it. Quantum mechanics was invented mainly in Germany. That didn't work out well, just the invention part. And so when we look to that future, we have to do these activities that retain it here, and that's an economic threat. Now, the national security threat is because of the implications, the capability of quantum, particularly around cryptography with our current encryption standards. We also can't afford the strategic surprise. It's not a Sputnik moment in the traditional sense, and this is stealing a line from Corban. It's truly a silent mushroom cloud. And so the investments that are going to secure American victory in that are going to be made today. It's not after we see that reality. Yeah. But again, Jacqueline, you spent so much time in this space.
No. I agree with everything you said. The only thing that I would add is that I think that, especially on the computing side of the house, just by virtue of the sheer size and power and everything else that the at least initial systems are going to sort of look like, there's going to be a scarcity phenomenon, right? In terms of who gets access, who gets runtime, who gets to leverage the capabilities and be the creators of the inventions that are going to come out of these incredible machines. And if we don't align ourselves both publicly and privately in the right way, I fear from a geopolitical implication perspective, who will align themselves with whoever has these capabilities, right? And how does that really disrupt fundamentally sort of our economics? So let's stay on computing for just a moment, Bharath, and if you would not mind, what are you thinking are sort of the first few things that a useful quantum computer are going to be able to do? And in your perspective, what's the gap between today and getting there? There's a lot of stuff in the media right now about 1 year, 2 years, 30 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of the applications that have been mentioned already, drug discovery, material science, just chemistry in general. I think the way to kind of wrap your head around it is fundamentally these things are quantum mechanical, right? Atoms, molecules, how they interact with each other. And so if you have a computer that is based on the laws of quantum mechanics, mapping the physics of a system like this onto a computer that shares the same fundamental physics will be much more efficient than mapping it onto a digital or classical computer. So much like most new computing technologies, it's often the first applications tend to be in the sciences, as the applications I just mentioned. But I think an important thing to keep in mind here, and often like people don't think about this, which is when you have a computer, right, or you have an algorithm that you want to run, maybe there's this like vision of a bunch of crazy computer scientists and a chalkboard proving like this is the fastest way to solve this problem. And that is true for a few algorithms, but for the vast majority, both classical and what we'll see in quantum as well, it's all heuristic, right? And the only way you're able to have these heuristics is if the machine actually exists, right? For example, the AI scaling laws, right? These are not things that someone wrote down on a piece of paper. They're completely empirical, and they were only found, per se, by the fact that people were building larger and larger and larger models. And so we don't have a quantum computer today that is, regardless of who says what on CNN. But
is there a modifier? Like the way that I personally talk about it, but I would love your perspective, is we don't have a quantum computer today that is commercially or cryptographically relevant.
Yeah, right? Like these are still scientific machines in that we're still understanding how they work and how we're going to scale them, right? And an analogy that I like to make here is, an analogy that's often made is comparing the timeline for quantum with the timeline for classical, right? Mm-hmm. Like, okay, you have the transistor, it was 1940s, and then integrated circuits, late 1950s, and then so forth, right? And it's been about 100 years of development there. And we're still in the very early days of quantum. Now, the point that people often miss there is when we were developing these first transistor-based computers, every time you added a little bit more sophistication, a few more transistors, you could now do something you couldn't do before, right? Whereas with quantum, we already have these amazing supercomputers that exist today. And so the bar is just that much higher, right? And so these machines really are useless until they're not. And so the question that we at Atlantic and many people in the community are asking is, how are we going to build a machine that is of the scale of the performance, that is capable of running these algorithms that, one, we already know will have provable speedups, but also the ones that will show up heuristically and empirically when we have these systems. And that's really the fundamental challenge here, is that we need to focus on building these systems that have the scale and performance of actually running these algorithms.
Well, and just extending that analogy a little bit, you know, if you look at the development of computer technology, RCA was obviously pioneering vacuum tubes. They didn't look at this little thing called a transistor because it just wasn't quite good enough, and they already, you know, they could work the vacuum tube technology well. That didn't work out so well for RCA. Right?
Yeah,
you have to be looking around the corner and investing in the future in order to keep that capability, from
Well,
my perspective.
The other really interesting thing here is the bar is much higher, but the way that quantum computers scale is also fundamentally different, right? And so that's what leaves us at risk of getting surprised, is if you go from 1 transistor to 20 transistors in a classical computer, you've gone from 1 transistor of computing power to 20 transistors of computing power. If you go from 1 qubit to 20 qubits, you've gone from 1 qubit of computing power to over 1 million qubits of computing power. That's why that superposition and entanglement matter, is because you're adding one more interaction with every other qubit. You scale at 2 to the n in an ideal model. That means that you take certain types of problems, the defining the Hamiltonian for penicillin. It's it's 41 atoms. 41, yeah. And if you were to try to do that with a classical computer, you would need more transistors than there are atoms in the observable universe. So
I'll take you one further. There are atoms, single atoms.
Yeah.
You can write down on a, okay, on a long piece of paper, but like on a piece of paper, the equation that would describe the properties of that atom, and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Single atom, right? And so this is, and I think this is also an important point to make here. Quantum often is talked in the sense, it's talked about in the sense that, it's just faster, right? It's not faster per se, it's different, right?
Yes.
And
That's
so
right, yeah.
this is a type of compute that will supplement our existing compute infrastructure, right? So today we have memory or CPU or GPU, and we'll have our QPU. And so this notion of a quantum computer being this, standalone thing that's, in someone's garage, right? Like that's probably not what it's going to be. Much like how we use different forms of compute today, this will just be another tool in our toolbox that will expand the horizon of what we consider to be computable.
Yeah. It'll take things that are literally impossible and make them everyday events so that we understand the world and how to interact with it in ways that are inconceivable today.
Yeah. So let's talk about how to get here. And I'm actually, just in the interest of time, I'm going to combine kind of 2 questions for Zach and Bharath, if that's okay. Zach, talk about the sort of ecosystem partnerships that we need to put into place or build upon to get to where we're trying to get to with this technology. And Bharath, for you, please talk about the investment that needs to come behind those partnerships and the R&D and kind of what your founder story is there.
Yeah, again, a little bit that kind of opportunity threat framework. What's interesting to me is because of the early stage nature of this, the investments that you need to make to secure that defining future are oddly kind of approachable. It's like if you go back in semiconductors, the dominant ecosystem player for high-end use lithography is ASML. The dominating investment that helped them get to that stage was about $60 million at the time, 60 million euros. Roll forward, it's about $120 million today. US CHIPS Act was $50 billion allocated, and they still aren't directly taking that on. Opportunity threat. Opportunity because we can get our head around that. We can dominate the future with it. The threat is it's also approachable for nation states like China or other kind of near-peer adversaries. And then when you look at that, it takes a village to make this stuff work. And when you're looking at the sorts of things that you need to do, some of that is done well by national labs, universities. Some of that is done, obviously, incredibly well by industry partners. But there's a liminal middle space of stuff that's really expensive. You don't get commercial scale return for that. You're not going to make your investors happy for undertaking those activities. And you're not going to get a great paper out of it. So a lot of the research university folks aren't interested. Canonical case is pilot fabs. Right? There's a reason that every single economy that invested in these liminal R&D fabs has dominated literally over 90% market share in their respective domains. America didn't do that, so we face the consequence. Or things like workforce development. It's hard, it's expensive, It's integral to our economy. And Maybell isn't going to go and do it. And so it's going to take a village, and it's going to take a village leveraging the strengths of absolutely everybody and the mindset of absolutely everybody, and then finding those bits that are gaps and ruthlessly executing against that. My North Star is iterate to innovate. This is the thing that China, I actually think, does well. It's not spend more money necessarily. Money's part of it. But it's iterate to innovate. How do you find those pieces of the stack and go from an idea to a widget to a sale faster than anywhere else? And if you do that, I think the iron law of advanced technology development is you win.
Yeah, and to talk about the investment piece, as I mentioned earlier, the bottleneck today is hardware, right? Like, this doesn't exist. Yeah. And so building hardware is expensive. These are physical machines. And that's going to require hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of investment per company that's trying to build these first machines.
These are like data center sized machines, just for
yeah.
Right?
These are not things that you like put in your phone.
Not
these
pocket
are
material.
proper computers. And so, this is not unheard of, right? There are industries out there that have long-ish lead times, say 8 years is when I think these first applications for quantum will come out, early 2030s. So there are technologies out there like biotech, right, where there's some patient capital. But for those industries, there's a already well-established way of how to invest, right? And so this doesn't really exist for technologies like quantum yet, and that's one part of the issue. The second part of the issue is, there's no standard benchmark or metric by which you can judge, if my technology is actually going to reach the level of performance and scale that it needs to. And one way of doing this is, if you have a technology that can already be put in the market, you just see what happens in the market. This is what we're seeing with AI today, right? Another way is you need to have a consensus on what matters. And up to today, I would say that every company simply quotes what best suits them, right? And as a result, there's a lack of trust in the investment market where I go to an investor and I say, hey, I've done this amazing breakthrough, and they have no idea whether they can believe what I'm saying is actually what matters, right? Or do we even agree on what the problem is, right? So I think that is something that really needs to, there needs to be some work done on that so that there's a standard benchmark. You can go to every company and say, do you have A, B, C, D? Like, what's your plan for this? And that way, we're not all tooting our hero metric. And one more thing to add here, and to tag along your point about fabs and whatnot. I think one of the big issues today, and this is something that will have to sort itself out over time, but is something to keep in mind. One major reason we don't have a consolidated fab for making superconducting qubits, for example, is because everyone's technology is so different. There's no standard, right? There's no standardization in this field. And so what Google does for its qubits may not be what I need for my qubits, right? And as a result, everything gets more expensive, right? Because there's no economies of scale. And that can compound on the investment issue as well. So there's really a lot of different angles here that really need to come together.
The one thing I'd add is, the good news story is folks are aware of this. Yeah. And if you look at something like DARPA's quantum benchmarking initiative, it's basically, it both has benchmarking in the name. Yeah. It also creates the right financial incentive that gets what has driven progress in the biotech sector, which is basically grand challenge prizes, right? You can make money in biotech years before your drug actually goes into a human for a commercial sale. And so, folks don't know about it. This is the Sleeper Apollo program for quantum initiatives. It's a standout throughout the world. Could not be more important. And it's here. Yeah. It's here. And we're on timelines that, in genomics, it takes 30 years to go from you ID a target to that actually going into a human. We're talking about 8 years? 8 years. It's the most exciting time to be alive.
100%. And in our final remaining seconds, I know there are very few of them, but Corban, 1 or 2 words about the infrastructure needs.
Yeah, ultimately, when you look at what it takes to build a quantum system, you have the fabs, you have the science, you have the cryo. We need to make sure that we are investing across the full stack because China is, right? China, in the 13th five-year plan, said they were going to pass the United States in the bend on quantum. And in that time, my company, being a cryo-focused company, you can question how much money they're spending. The best number out there is like maybe 8 times as much as we are. But more importantly, we see the scientific papers, right? And we went from a world in 2016 when China said that, where they were a non-entity on low temperature physics. No papers, nothing that mattered, to over the last 3 years, half of all global English language papers are coming out of China. And a subset of them are really good. And that should worry us and should spur investment, because it is very easy for China to do in quantum what they did in 5G with Huawei. Yep. And 5G is maybe a decade-long implication, our loss in that piece of the tech stack. With quantum, it's going to last a century. And what Zach said about the Sputnik moment being a silent mushroom cloud, that's a risk here. When we lose out on this, it's going to have profound and permanent implications for us. And so we need to make sure that the QBI is the start of something and not something where we say, good, we've done enough, because our global adversaries are not slowing down.
And on that incredibly optimistic note, we will leave you. Thank you to my panelists.